So just like that, Chris, we are live. Not that much different than pre-show, but we're just now recording. So yeah, I'd love to kick it off and just kind of cover our bases here with Blackthorn, which you have a fantastic t-shirt on. This is blackthorn.io.
Got to represent.
Yeah, I got to represent. I like that. Yeah, maybe tell me just kind of in your own words how you articulate what the company is trying to accomplish in the world, and then what the moment of conception was when you guys started the company.
Sure. So in the Salesforce ecosystem, there are apps that you can install from their store into your platform, like you have with iOS and Android. And those apps do any number of things. A lot of those apps are really quite hard to be able to both set up and to use. Salesforce is a massively successful platform that created Trailhead to help people learn how to use the platform, because it's not actually that easy to be able to use. So our mission is to make apps for the platform that are very easy to use, that also happen to look pretty good, that feel good using them. So I started a services company before this, and I was implementing a number of payments apps for other customers. And I found it very hard to get the apps to do a lot of additional things. Like they did a charge and a refund pretty well, but there were a lot of additional nuances that you had to write in code. So I figured, why do these things have to get written custom? They should just come packaged. So it started with the payments app, and then my co-founder at the time said, why don't we have an events app as well? So our events app serves as the checkout layer, if you will, to the payments app, because those two areas are not served by Salesforce. They rely on partners to fill those gaps. So the goal of the company and the primary focus is to deliver these experiences primarily for higher ed and nonprofit that the Salesforce platform isn't giving them. So I acquired two companies in the last 9 months. One of them is around compliance, which does some PCI, PII detection using regex. Another one is for doing SMS and messaging. So there's this suite of products that we're selling to higher ed and nonprofit, but we have customers across other verticals, but they're really tailored for those.
Super interesting. I got to ask, how on earth is Salesforce so successful and so ugly? I've used the product before. At one of my last startups, we had it. And what our sales girls was like, we got to get Salesforce. And so we got it, we paid. And you have to pay. It's the only piece of software I've ever seen. I'm sure there are others. But you have to pay someone to set it up. It's so complicated. So we hired this person who was super expensive, came to our office in LA and set up this Salesforce. And the whole experience to me was like, it just was a juxtaposition where I'm like, this was so hard to buy. It's so expensive. It's so ugly, yet it's so big and successful. How do you make sense of that?
Yeah, it's pretty amazing what Benioff and Parker Harris were able to do. So the platform is exceptionally powerful and flexible. You can do so many things on this thing, but only if you know what you're doing. You can't just start using this thing unless you're a trained professional. Like you need to go at it like a doctor doing surgery, but you can't unless you read a year of PDFs first. So it's very successful because it took what Oracle and there were a number of different relational database products that came out that were all local. You had to have data centers in your office. You had to have some server. And the experience didn't scale. It was very expensive and it really stunk. Additionally, they weren't very flexible. You had to write code to do any nitty-gritty thing. Salesforce was the first that came out that put it on a browser instead of having some local app that you had to deploy. You didn't have to install it on a server, and they let you do things in the platform that previously took code. So if you wanted to have a custom field on a page, so it originally started as CRM, customer relationship management. I have a business, there's a person working there. I want to store new criteria about the person called pet's name. In the past, you would have to write code to create a field or a space that you would create pet's name. But with Salesforce, they created this way that with some clicks, you could create a custom field. And now every software app there is can do this out of the box, but that didn't exist a little over 20 years ago. And they were the first to do that. Their initial UI was really disgusting. And then they made this Salesforce Classic, which was really snappy and fast, but again, still it looked good when it came out, and then they held it for a bit too long. And now Lightning looks beautiful. It's very flexible, but it's very client-side heavy. It takes a while to load. So if you're working with this thing not on a pretty fast connection, it's not the snappiest. So they actually created this speed measuring tool that's behind the scenes that you can work on making your pages faster using this speed measuring tool. So it's successful because it allows you to do a lot of things declaratively that previously used code. So there's hundreds of thousands or millions of people that are now doing stuff to this platform that previously would have had to have been developers. But it doesn't mean that you can still just sit down in front of this thing as your first day using Salesforce and all of a sudden you're a magician. It still takes time.
Yeah, so it's kind of like the breadth of the functionality is what makes it appealing. I imagine for larger sales organizations in particular that have really unique kind of needs that they prioritize that flexibility, even if it's slower and uglier. And I mean, it really comes down to competitors, right? Like Salesforce would have to have competitors who are not as good. You know, if there's something that had the functionality that Salesforce did, but looked good and was intuitive, they couldn't have won. But I guess they were just ahead of the game on relational, like setting up a relational database through the UI, regardless of how it looks.
Yeah, they were years ahead of everyone else coming out with this being browser accessible. But the one that's really come along that's done great is HubSpot. They never went after the biggest segment of the business. So Salesforce has some deals that are very, very big. Some customers pay over $100 million per year.
What?
HubSpot's going after, yeah, there's some customers that are like really quite big.
Who pays that?
HubSpot.
Like what kind of company would pay that?
Actually,
like
you'd have to be Fortune 100 and you need to have global deployment where you shift your whole company onto a very large platform, like very, very large.
Yeah.
But then there's the other end of the spectrum, which HubSpot focused on what SMBs need. Very easy way to manage your customers and do emails. Salesforce never did emails very well. They bought two companies, which they now have rebranded as Marketing Cloud, and they kept the original Pardot name of the other one. But it's still outside of the platform. HubSpot ended up doing very well, just going after the 30, 40K deals of the world, but a lot of them. And they made it look very beautiful and very easy. So that captured a different end of the market. But Salesforce is still far and away the most scalable platform you can use if you're a very large company. And the longer the platform exists, the more people want to have their systems living in one place. They don't want to manage 15 different integrations. They don't want their employees have to jump between systems, which is where we come in. Our company would not have been successful when Salesforce just started. No one wanted to do payments on the platform or do events, or we're working on now a commerce app. Salesforce went to, they bought Demandware and they bought Cloud Craze, which go after a bigger end of the market. No one's serving the SMB side of the market as like a Shopify for Salesforce. This concept never existed. You would just use Shopify. Why would you do this? But now there's all sorts of companies on there. It's opened the door for companies like us to be successful with these little add-ons.
Yeah. It kind of reminds me of the Shopify model where you have kind of this base infrastructure layer for, in their case, e-commerce, and then you have all the apps that can build on top of it, which I assume is like a playbook out of the original App Store on Apple, which is brilliant because it really locks in your company as the trunk of the tree.
It's the story Benioff gave. Why can't I think of his name now? He gave App Store to Steve Jobs, and then he took App Exchange instead. But App Store was originally Benioff's.
Oh, idea? Yeah.
He owned, I think, the domain as well as the idea, and he told Jobs, "Here, I'll just give this thing to you." That's how I understand the story.
No way. Huh, that's pretty wild. Yeah. It's so funny now. It just feels obvious, right? It's like, oh, yeah, just allow other people to build on top of your platform. But, I mean, it really isn't. Yeah. It's funny. Most companies don't go this route. Like most companies, I suppose it somewhat depends on scale and functionality, but if you're building like a large scale SaaS company, it doesn't to me feel intuitive that you would need to open up an app store, like allow other developers to build on top of, say, Salesforce, how you guys are doing. Is there something, do you think that this playbook works everywhere as companies get larger, or do you think there's something about Salesforce or Apple is different, I think, structurally, but I don't know. What are your thoughts? Like
AWS,
yeah.
AWS has done this really well. If you look at Snowflake, they compete with AWS, but they're built on AWS. So if they make money, AWS is still making money. Everything is built on top of Twilio. Like our SMS app uses Twilio, and they have a whole ecosystem of companies that use Twilio. If you look at Stripe, they're just providing infrastructure. They created a huge store. We're on their store. A lot of companies are on their it's not a platform that you're plugging into, but their apps are built so out of the box, they just immediately work with Stripe. So there's all these middleware tools that have come up. Like Zapier was the first like point solution one, not like an enterprise like service bus that was created, but they were the first more SMB targeted company that came up, and everyone created these software apps to do all these little things, but now everyone wants to tie them together and ideally get them under the same roof. So that's why the Salesforce platform's gotten big. They crossed some echelon in the last few days, like 10 million installs of apps, which is unbelievable. These are not consumer apps. This is businesses installing business apps into environments to work. It's pretty amazing.
That's pretty wild. And so when you were working on the agency, the services work, did you buy these two companies or buy one of the companies to get into the software manufacturing game? I mean, did you say, hey, we need to buy to get into this, or did you start coding yourself, or like how did you build out these, go from like services to product?
Sure. So I'm a semi-technical person. I was writing code when I was younger, but I'm pretty good with the click side of Salesforce. I do a lot of the architecture for our company, but I'm not writing the code. So in starting the last company, I was the one that was doing the sales plus doing the deployments before we brought other people on. So as I was starting to use these other apps, I saw that it needed to have this payments app that was easier. So we took a few of us to then create the payments app ourselves. And then we spun out the Blackthorn business, the apps business, out of the services company to then create the apps business from scratch, from the ground up, and just bootstrap the business.
That's awesome. And the first one, how many apps now do you have?
There is payments, events, compliance. There's Texty, which is about to be renamed Blackthorn Messaging, which is 4. And we have a 5th, which will be Blackthorn Commerce, and that will be out a bit later this year. So there's 5. But they all work together without having to write any integrations. So as a business, if you want to solve all these needs you have, you can then we just released, I don't think we put it on social yet, but it's candyshop.blackthorn.io. It's like a little store. You go to this store and you click a few buttons and it drops all the apps into your environment, and they're all pre-configured and set up and they all work together, which is a concept that if you have a consumer app, you just install it and you start using it. It doesn't exist for enterprise apps. There's so much work you have to do to them. But this is a technology called Metadeploy that works with Cumulus CI. It's like a CI/CD tool that Salesforce has open sourced. And what it does is it scripts a lot of the setup configurations you need. So all these clicks people had to do manually before, you can now just run these clicks that these scripts that automatically do what you previously had to do in setup for hours.
Damn, it's amazing that it was so bad for so long.
It was really rough for a long time. It takes a long time to make tooling.
Yeah. I suppose even just downloading the app and getting it to work with the data you have in Salesforce was just not. That wasn't the status quo.
Salesforce bought Demandware. Do you know how much it costs to stand up Demandware?
What do you mean?
Stand up, just to go live.
Oh, so after they bought them?
You would buy licenses for Demandware and you pay for it. There's different structures Salesforce charges, but you pay them. But then to actually get the thing live and working,
Oh God.
it's generally $500,000 to work with an SI partner to make Demandware work. I've heard quotes from $300,000 to $800,000, and many people within Salesforce have told me it averages around $500,000. The point of what I'm trying to say is that these apps, they're excellent applications. They scale to no end. Like these are the apps that are powering like some of the biggest e-commerce stores on the internet. The problem though is that they take a very long time to set up. You're configuring a lot of very advanced rules. If you pick this, it has to output this and have this kind of taxation, and like it takes a long time to set up for a reason. But some of the setup is very technical. It's not like you're following some non-technical thing. Some of it is very technical. So what we're trying to do is remove the technical piece of being able to set up our apps. Like if you're running an event, it takes a long time to set up an event. I have this session at this time and this speaker, and I have this image. Like someone's doing the work on the app, right? But you have to spend some time to configure who's going to have permissions to the application. Is it sending out this email automatically? And we wanted to find ways to automate how this works, but also have it integrate with the apps correctly. So I want to take a payment in the Events app. How do I have the payment automatically go to Stripe or Authorize.net or Spreedly? So I have to install another app and do that. No. So what we do is we automate how that connects, and then you can do the reconciliation within your platform. And if you think of all the tools you need to run a business, like you need these point little apps everywhere. So we try to bring it together in something that is automated and really simple.
Yeah, man, that's what I'm literally mind blown that it would take $500,000 on average to connect to Band Media.
IDC does this survey seemingly every year. I guess maybe it's every year. It used to say that a few years ago, they said the Salesforce ecosystem was going to create a $240 billion ecosystem of work surrounding the platform. So that would be people paying SI companies, employment of people at these system integrators, the platform itself, the whole ecosystem itself. They came out with one a few months ago that said, I think in 3 or 4 years, it's going to be $1 trillion market. Like Salesforce is not making $1 trillion of revenue, right? There's like 25 billion of revenue. That means somehow you're getting from 25 billion to $1 trillion. It's a very large ecosystem. And the reality is that Salesforce does this very well. They like, it takes a lot of money to make these things, but it's really great what they made. But there's no other way to really make it that much simpler because the things that they're solving are very complicated. The problem is that you have to know what you're doing to be able to configure this thing. So it's a very weird kind of cycle.
And you think that's the piece that can change. Like instead of being incredibly technical to be able to set things up, these questions presumably aren't that sophisticated. Maybe maybe you could get really sophisticated, but in theory you could say, okay, when would you like your email to go out? 1 week after purchase, and drag and drop the content you want to have, and then who gets notified, and then you enter it in. Like your example of Zapier. To me, Zapier does things so simple in a way that they could make that stuff, like Zapier could be fucking super complicated. I could imagine the kind of experience that they offer, like connect this and connect that. There's another product, Integromat. It's a balance of, I feel like software is generally a balance of product features, the right product features in a user interface that it walks you down this path at a speed you can handle. Like if you throw 50 questions at people all at once with overload of functionality, it's like I don't know I can't do this, and that's. That my sense is that's a Salesforce model where it's like, here's everything you could possibly configure, go at it, and you need to read all these PDFs for a year to figure it out. But do you see in theory they could simplify this to where like you could get from 500,000 to 5,000 on installs for some of these apps?
There's always an opportunity to do something better.
Yeah.
Right. But I don't know enough about all the nuances of the platform and what it can do now to take a stance on that. It's gotten to be so we're in our 6th year. We have these 4 pretty sizable apps now. 2 of them are really quite big. What I told the team the other day is I don't think there's a single person in our company who knows everything that all of our apps do. and we're only 6 years in, and now we have 80 people.
Mm-hmm.
Salesforce has something like 50,000 people in 20 years of doing this. There's no one that knows everything this thing does. It's gotten to this point where it's this self-generating giant monster, and they've actually now created competing concepts in their own ecosystem that they even own. So they have like 2 email tools. They have 2 tools to buy and sell things on the 2 e-commerce tools. They have multiple different architectures. You have to decide which architecture to use because some of the apps only work with select architecture. So I'm kind of going on a rant from your original question, but there is an opportunity to somehow address this and make it simpler, but to get the amount of functionality they were able to cram into this thing and to solve this for very large companies, I think would be pretty hard to do again. But if you look at someone like Stripe, they're taking a very different approach to being able to solve all the issues of money shuffling around the world. They started only doing it by code, but then they put these UI layers on top of it to make it easier. I think Salesforce has an opportunity to do more around the UI layer aspect. That's a bit snappier of a UI. It's not very performant. That does something to make the navigation of the setup easier. It's grown enormous and a bit unwieldy.
Yeah. It's amazing to me. I would think that this would be like front and center of what they're thinking about, but it's also amazing to me that very large companies can have very terrible user experiences. Like if you just even take the category of banks, like banks generally speaking, unless they're like a web first bank, they have a terrible experience. Like Chase Bank. I was on Chase Bank the other day and going to look at my credit card statement, and I wanted to set up auto pay, and it's like, oh, the option for auto pay is not available right now. It's like some ugly error across the screen that I would never see if you were using, I don't know, like Slack or Airtable or even Gmail or something. You just don't see these kind of blatant mistakes, for lack of a better word.
Yeah, I think at some point it gets very hard to be able to right the ship. Salesforce has an incredible underlying functionality, and they have written new UIs on top of the existing functionality. You still can't, for example, we've had to make some very fast changes with our events app because very quickly we hit a lot of bottlenecks with customers that were having issues because Salesforce as a database wasn't performant. So we've had to set up caching and different persisted data running on different content delivery networks, originating from Heroku and then using Cloudinary and different things on Mongo, where Salesforce just wasn't designed to be an API-driven database, right? It's not taking the Stripe approach. It can't handle large data volumes. You get 1 million records on a custom object, you'll start to have some problems. You throw 1 million rows of data into Mongo, a million key value pairs, like it doesn't care. It's just waking up in the morning, you know? You could throw hundreds of millions and it's fine. So I think they have an older architecture that they're a bit stuck with. Years ago, they patented some new methods to be able to spin up instances quicker and to work with key value data stores, but I haven't seen anything, right? It takes a long time to make these changes after you have hundreds of thousands of businesses live. You get into API versioning, you get into issues where functionality just completely stops. You can turn off businesses if you do the wrong thing. And they're deploying their platform globally in one shot now. So it's hard to make those changes.
Yeah, God, that is wild. It's wild to think of it as how complicated it actually is.
It's amazing. It's amazing what they did. It's very complicated.
Yeah. And I know the story was kind of Benioff came from Oracle, realizing that. What were they doing previous to that, do you think? Like, what was the world pre-Salesforce? It was just paper. I mean, were they using paper and pencil? Like, there was...
Larry Ellison's... So I don't know if any of this is true, but I heard the one thing Bill Gates regrets that Larry Ellison did was the creation of the relational database, which is how Salesforce actually still runs on Oracle databases. They pay Oracle a lot of money to continue running on these databases. Oracle had I don't know the name. I know PeopleSoft was one of them before this, but I don't know if that was the core one. where Oracle was building CRM systems that were running off of local data stores. And then Benioff said, this thing needs to be in the cloud. So he effectively reproduced what Oracle was already doing just in the cloud. So they didn't have to recreate this IP of the user experience, where they recreated it, but they knew what the use cases were. They just had to take a completely different tech approach.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, the migration to the cloud is kind of, I mean, if you know there is a critical functionality in the world that needs to exist and you just duplicate it, there's been so many businesses. There's a friend of mine who has this company, man, what was it called? It was called Smart Draw, and it was a hosted service. So you could buy like the CD, put it in your computer, and then you could draw up like user flows and that kind of thing. And
cool.
Lucid Press was the web version. So they just literally was like, oh, Smart Draw has this machine local version. Well, we're just going to make it in the cloud, and like required very little creativity and successful. So yeah, but we're largely past. I mean, we're entirely past that. I don't know any software providers that have not adopted the cloud yet.
It's getting there. If you look at the success of Carta, that whole thing was on spreadsheets only a few years ago, and now they've exploded. I think there's still a lot of these use cases that have not been turned into apps and are still living as spreadsheets.
Yeah. Do you see a path towards disruption on Salesforce? Do you think they're just going to keep growing? I mean, would you buy into their stock? Are you long Salesforce?
Yeah. Very long Salesforce.
Really?
I've had, I've had
obviously
15 offers to buy the company, and I've told everybody no. Like, we're doing this minimum 4 more years and scaling this thing, because Salesforce is at 25 billion revenue now. And I heard a year ago, their forecast for 2036 was 60 billion, and they'll absolutely hit it.
2036?
In the year 2036, 60 billion was the guidance that I heard.
Man, 2036, that's impressive. They could even make a forecast that far out.
I don't know where that came from. I have no idea. The point is that I know they're going to keep growing because I know the competition out there, and it's just not like what they built. It's so good.
Yeah. Fascinating. There's a friend of mine who has a company called Recharge, and they built on Shopify. And one of the things I would talk to him about is how do you know is there like an existential risk building on top of another company where you're limited by the scale of them?
Big one.
Is that a concern? Like, you haven't raised money, right? Or have you?
We've not really raised. A friend threw in 50K. I went through the launch accelerator, gave 100K, and that's about it. 2 years ago, employees bought 180K of stock, but now we're at a bit over 7 million ARR, and we're doing pretty well now. We're financing a lot through CapChase now, but we never raised. But in terms of building on a platform, though, I've heard this expression that you're riding on this dragon, and sometimes the dragon turns around. The expression comes from there's a lot of founders in the app ecosystem that are between this 1 to 10 million ARR mark. It's usually around 1 to 5 million ARR mark for a lot of the apps that are out there. And Salesforce has a very easy ability to recreate your app on their platform. I have seen it so many times. So there was a Map Anything and GeoPoint that were competing for this mapping software on the platform. Salesforce bought Map Anything, became Salesforce Maps, and it immediately put a huge dent into GeoPoint's business. Same thing happened with SteelBrick and Aptus. There's a long internal story about how it occurred, where Salesforce was using Aptus internally, but they bought SteelBrick because they couldn't come to the right terms with Aptus, was how I heard it. But after they bought SteelBrick, no one's implementing Aptus anymore for Salesforce. Like, it goes away. So we had to know who our competitors were in order to figure out where we were going to put our efforts. Where in the payments market, we focused on making it really easy, where we knew our competitors, it was a bit difficult. And with events, there were really just 2 main competitors. So we tried to understand like where they were great and what customers were looking for to try to, do something a bit different there. And we've been lucky that Salesforce, while we were building this up, didn't buy our competitors. for those other applications. If they did, we would be in a very different place. But that's why I also want to have the commerce app as well as having platform messaging, because it de-risks us a good bit.
Yeah.
So we have pretty good revenue diversification now. So if once we launch the commerce app, that's going to diversify us even further. So if Salesforce did do something, of course it's going to change our business. But the unique thing about Salesforce is that once a large business ties in all of their automation into your core platform, the switching cost is very high. As long as your app doesn't go down and your service stays pretty good and you continue to have some new features, they're going nowhere ever.
Yeah, interesting. Do you think Salesforce behind the scenes will like deprioritize? Obviously, if they buy a company and the company has a direct competitor on the Salesforce platform, it's such a funny configuration of competition. Like Amazon has this reputation of like, oh, you want to sell Duracell batteries on our platform? Come over, come in the front door. Let's sell. You sell Duracell, and you're Duracell like chief marketing officer. You're like, oh, we're crushing it on Amazon, like up and to the right. And then Amazon comes out with their like basic battery package, and oh, Amazon batteries happen to be number one. Like they can just they just fuck with the code a little bit and they prioritize everything. It doesn't. You don't. It's not. It's because it's digital and you don't know how the algorithm works exactly. They just have such incredible leverage. Do you see that as being something that people who are sore over? You know, if I'm a founder of a company whose a competitor was acquired, I'm like, I'm super frustrated because I feel like there's not a fair playing field anymore.
There's a few different theories behind this. There's one where I'm forgetting the first half of the saying, but it's something rises all tides, like Moore's ships or something.
Yeah, rising
whatever
tide
it is,
rises all boats. Does that sound right?
Thank you. I was completely destroying that. The concept behind that is that if Salesforce releases something, it's going to get more publicity to the use case. Or if they buy a company in the space and integrate it, your use case will start to get more interest because Salesforce is doing all the marketing for you. That's one way to look at it. From experience of what I've seen, it's completely untrue. The flip side is that Salesforce is now so big. If they buy a company at 10 million ARR and they sell 30 million the next year of this thing, it's a rounding error on when Benioff goes on Jim Cramer and he's talking about guidance, it's in the billions. It's not in the millions. So what I heard is that when Salesforce makes a move, that SKU that they add has to add at least 100 million of revenue in order to make a big dent. So Salesforce does a lot of acquisitions, but they're more, they call them like IP roll-ups. They just need the tech to plug in. They're not doing it for revenue reasons. So it depends upon what the company is actually doing and the reason why they would buy them. They're buying these giant companies like Slack because they need the revenue and they need the ability to cross-sell into their customer base, not because it's anywhere living inside of Salesforce. Every customer that Slack has is a Salesforce customer or a potential customer.
Interesting. Is that an end game for Slack, do you think?
Being part of Salesforce or
being acquired?
Oh yeah, Salesforce picked them up maybe 6 months ago or 5 months ago. It was something crazy, like 26 billion or something. I don't remember the number.
I totally missed this. How did I not know?
It was something huge, some humongous number. And there's a lot of use cases, like you won a deal and it tells everybody you won the deal. A support case has an issue and there's a case swarm between people to gravitate towards that. But I think they missed the boat with a webinar tool.
Yeah.
I would be willing to guess every single Salesforce customer has some kind of webinar tool, right? Like there's a lot of use cases that are immediate layups for them. If you think of any business that's over 100 people, like what are the tools that they're using? Salesforce could buy that vertical and just cross-sell all of them immediately.
Yeah, it kind of sounds like Google's playbook to some degree. I mean, they don't have the CRM, the same Salesforce competitive product, but they do have kind of the roll-up enterprise where they're like Google Drive, Google Docs. It's kind of a more Microsoft application layer competitive game that they're playing. It's interesting. I would think that this would be like Google's bread and butter, is trying to get into this game and offer a serious competitive threat to Salesforce, but I don't see it. I don't know if you see any product that they're coming out with that is.
No, there was talk for a while. The closest one was with Microsoft with Dynamics, and that product is just not good. The old one. Now I haven't used it in two
Yeah,
years. So whatever they've done in the last 2 years, if
yeah.
they created something new or if they needed something new with a web-based Dynamics or something beautiful, I have no idea. But it takes a very long time to make these things, and they were touted to be the ones that were the closest, and it was nowhere close.
Mm.
HubSpot went after something very different in terms of actually pushing Salesforce out. I just don't see anyone close. Google has had some fits and starts into things. They had this thing, Google App Maker, where you can build this UI and connect your data sources and create fields behind it and create whatever app you want, and it didn't work. The next closest thing you have to that is Airtable, where I forget the founder's name, but he previously sold a company to Salesforce, and I think he understood what Salesforce's gaps were pretty well. So he found a pretty good way to combine multiple data sources into that grid format and have components that you could drop in, and that's the closest thing to a Salesforce, but it's different.
Yeah,
It's serving a different use case. A lot of companies have both. They don't have one versus the other that
yeah,
I've seen at
yeah,
least.
yeah. No, I'm a big Airtable fan. Cool, man. Well,
Howie Long, was that his name? Howie
I
Long or
don't
something,
know.
maybe?
I don't know.
Forget his
All I
name.
know is that it works really well.
It does work really
Yeah.
well.
Uh, and so you guys, no plans to raise, just grind on the cash flow and build out more apps and scale the apps you have.
I mean, CapChase has given us a lot of credit. We have something over 4 million of credit with CapChase. They funded up to 60% of our ARR, something like that.
Oh
So
wow,
with that,
that's awesome.
yeah, with that, I mean, we've been able to we tripled the team last year. I mean, the cost is headcount, right? That's the biggest limiting factor. So we were able to triple the team, and that anytime you triple anything, it breaks every
Yeah,
process, right?
yeah,
So it took a while to rebuild all of our process to accommodate for the new team size, and now we're pushing ahead. I mean, we'll see what happens. I mean, a raise is not totally out of the question, but
yeah.
I would prefer to not dilute if we don't have to, because then we don't have any investors that we have to appease if we wanted to sell at some point, where they'll be pushing for a higher multiple or they need some kind of return that they could decline
Hmm.
or break. And,
Yeah,
you know, we're going in the right trajectory.
yeah.
We're forecasting 100% year over year for the third year or something now, and
It's awesome.
it's
Yeah,
working.
it's working. And is the deal with raising money based on revenue? Is that you're trading a percentage of your revenue in exchange for upfront cash? Is that the structure?
Yeah, I mean, if we raised 20% of the company is gone,
Right, with equity.
generally speaking, right? It's usually anywhere from 15 to 25% in a general raise. If we did a smaller round, which typical VCs, they don't usually want to do like a 4 or 5% round.
Right.
They usually want to do 15 to 25%. They want a board seat or two. They want to update your shareholder agreement. You know, it can be very useful if we want to move really, really fast. In my opinion, we're executing quite well, and we don't have a reason to take on cash in exchange for the dilution.
Is the setup that you have? I know I'm not as familiar with these newer companies that are offering cash up front in exchange for it's not a loan, right? It's revenue based
Oh,
financing.
like with CapChase and
Yeah,
Pike
yeah,
and FounderPass and
exactly.
Clearbank and them. Yeah, so it's the new version of a time and materials business's invoice factoring. You sell your contract, they fund it on day one at a discount, and then you pay them back over 12 months. So, for example, they'll fund your ARR at a 7, 8, 9, 10% discount. So, for simplicity, if you have a 10K contract, they'll give you 9K today, and over 12 months, you pay them 10K.
Hmm.
It's more or less what it becomes. So your rate, your interest rate you're paying annualized is anywhere from 12 to 18%, something like that. But they don't dilute the cap table at all. You're just
Yeah, yeah.
end up paying fees out the nose. And I would take fees over cap table dilution.
Totally, totally. Especially when you're growing quickly. So the contract, they're paying a contract. Does that mean they're just giving you cash in the bank to spend on whatever you want? Right.
We can do
Yeah.
whatever we want
Okay.
with it. Yeah,
Yeah. The way.
I could pull the whole
Yeah.
line
Yeah.
and take a flight
Yeah.
somewhere and
Okay.
you'll never find me
I
again.
thought the way you said it there for a second, I was thinking there was you had a contract in hand that they would front. But yeah, that makes much more sense. Which is, I mean, if it's highly predictable, like SaaS-based, consistently growing year over year software as a service business, it makes sense to offer that.
I I think these companies are doing so well because they're such low risk. When you have
Mm-hmm.
a enterprise B2B SaaS company, if your churn is good, people aren't leaving. Like if your GRR is 90% or above, like that's a
Yeah.
surefire win
Yeah.
that you're going to get paid. So there's very little risk, but we have to keep a minimum balance in our account. It's not like they
Mm-hmm.
let us do anything. We only have credit available up to, I think 60% of
Mm-hmm.
our ARR, give or take
Mm-hmm.
somewhere in there. They helped us to buy the companies. They fund anywhere from like 120 to 150% of the ARR. So you have like a down payment and then the rest you pay over time. So it's been a great model.
Yeah, yeah, it's smart. It's kind of surprising it didn't come around earlier, or at least wasn't very popular earlier.
Yeah, seriously, could have been here 10 years ago and done just as
Yeah,
well.
yeah, yeah. I agree. There's no structural change to the way financing worked in the last year. I mean, even with the
Yep.
crowdfunding regulations, that wouldn't have affected it. It's the same. Yeah. Well, man, congrats on all the progress. I love the name too, by the way. Blackthorn, solid. .io,
Ah,
blackthorn.io.
.io.
Not to be
That's right.
confused. Yeah, keep crushing, man. Thanks so much for hopping on today. Are you active on any social or Twitter or LinkedIn or yeah,
I put random stuff
yeah,
on
yeah.
LinkedIn. If anyone is listening that is excellent with Node or with MongoDB and is a database administrator, please email me. It's chris@blackthorn.io. We need you.
Nice.
That's my
Are
plug.
you guys remote? Totally remote?
Yeah, we've been remote since we started. We're in 15, 16 US states. I think we're in 8 or 9 countries now as well.
Awesome.
So we have a series of different stand-ups every day based upon people's time zones. And we're big on typing a lot of stuff in Jira comments and GitHub commits and Slack and recording things. And a lot more is documented now than maybe an in-person company.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Sweet, man. I love it. Keep crushing. And I hope to have you back on someday. All right.
Cool. Thanks, Mike. Thanks for having
See
me
you,
on.
Chris.